Hello all participants. Thanks for joining us today webinar. So today's webinar is hosted by or today we have the one of the leading blockchain expert, Mr. Aman Ladia. Okay, so he is one currently as a blockchain developer and advisor. Okay, and he's currently a founder and CEO of Liquid Protocol. So today he'll be discussing about the blockchain essentials and how currently in this today technological transformation world, how the blockchain is disrupting the various industry. So he'll be discussing the different industry use cases, and you will get to know how blockchain has a lot of tremendous and various applications. Okay, and the structure of this webinar is that Mr. Aman, he will share the presentation with you. Okay, and at last so we'll address you for the 1 hour, and at last for 20 minutes we'll have question and answer session. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can always raise a hand. You will be allowed to talk. Okay, or you can always put in a chat box or in a Q&A section. Okay, so this is how the structure will follow for this today's webinar. And myself, I'm a Shubham here. I'm a program associate for this PGB Blockchain Technology Management Program, and I'm currently responsible to coordinate with the faculties, leading industry experts, and all the our participants for this PGB blockchain program. So starting with now, I will hand over this webinar to Mr. Aman. So Aman, you can start. Yeah.
Thank you, Shubham. All right. So hello all. I think Shubham already gave an introduction to me. I'll just elaborate on it a bit further. So I've been involved in blockchain for the last 6 or 7 years, and I've worked with a number of companies. I have written reports, research reports with Emirates National Bank of Dubai. It's the largest bank of the Middle East. I have worked with several other firms, and right now I am the CEO of Liquid Protocol, which is a startup that I initiated this year as a blockchain startup involved in liquidity of crypto tokens. So with that in mind, today's webinar, as you all know, is going to be on blockchain essentials. So we're going to be looking at potential applications for blockchain, how you can understand how to put blockchain into potential applications, how you can disrupt the industry. And I will also be including a 60-day timeline for you guys to work on and to really get started on blockchain. Now, as Shubham mentioned, please post the Q&A into the Q&A section or in the chat. I will look at them from time to time. So the presentation today is structured into 3 major parts. First of all, we have what makes a great blockchain application, where I'll be explaining the concept of trust and other concepts related to blockchain. The next part, we'll be looking at how to analyze industries to come up with unique blockchain solutions. So we're going to be looking at what parts of an industry are usually great to put blockchain in. Within this section, we'll also have some case studies. So we're looking at 5 or 6 case studies from different industries, and hopefully that'll help you get an idea of how blockchain is headed. And lastly, the last section of today's presentation will be on how you, under 60 days, can make your own blockchain application and how you can disrupt the industry with something unique. So with that in mind, I will share my screen so you can see the presentation. So, right. So let's get started. So on blockchain essentials, I already introduced myself. Let's look at the first section, which is what makes a great blockchain application. So I think the first thing to remember when we talk about blockchain is trust. Now, I'm sure a lot of you must have heard this before, trust and blockchain. That's what blockchain is known for. It is the epitome of trust. You don't need trust to run blockchain. Unfortunately, the problem is that this understanding is flawed. Trust is very much needed to run the blockchain. We call it trustless, but that's in a very broad sense. Blockchain does require trust. And the sooner you understand this, the better it is, because you can pitch blockchain as a trustless data storage solution, but at the end of the day, it is not truly trustless. So first, let's try to understand what is trust. So in business, trust refers to the confidence you place on another individual or organization. So how confident are you in dealing with another company? That's what trust means. And every business needs trust to run. So blockchain, where does blockchain come into trust? So as I mentioned, blockchain is not trustless. Blockchain works with a minimal amount of trust. So let me give you an example. I'm sure all of you know how blockchain works, so I won't go into too much detail about that. But I think a great technical example of this is how blockchains can run with 3 nodes, can run with 30 nodes, 300 nodes, 3,000 nodes, 30,000 nodes. And each of these numbers results in a different amount of trust. So if you have 3 nodes, which is essentially 3 people communicating, if 2 people believe that something is correct, if 2 people believe that a transaction is valid, the transaction is valid. That's how the blockchain would validate it. So how does trust work in this? Well, if you have 3 players and 3 of them are running nodes for a blockchain, well, you need to have a very, very close amount of trust between those 3 players. Because even if 2 players come on one side and they believe that a certain transaction or a certain flow of information is the correct flow of information, whether they are right or wrong doesn't matter. If they program themselves to believe that, then the blockchain will accept that transaction as true, even if they are wrong. So if you have a limited number of players, you need a very, very strong amount of trust between the players to even run a blockchain system. Let's look at another example. Now, let's say if you had 300 nodes. So let's say we were talking about colleges. Okay, colleges running a blockchain network for something, maybe for papers or something of that sort. 300 nodes running together. Here, the requirement for trust is lesser because 150 players need to be on one side to, pass a transaction. But again, like we said, 150 players, if they are on one side, they can decide to pass an incorrect transition or an incorrect, flow of information as the correct flow of information. So again, a degree of trust is needed even if you have 300 players. 3,000 players, what the Bitcoin network was a couple of years ago, 3,000 players. Even lesser trust is needed. But trust is still important. Trust that each of those 3,000 people, 3,000 nodes will function independently and function correctly is, a core concept of blockchain that simply cannot be avoided. So thinking about this, blockchain works best where you need a minimal amount of trust. So a trust where you can know that the parties know each other, the parties have some sort of basic agreement, but they may not be partners, they may not have a great deal of trust on each other. Still, trust is needed. So whenever you try to think of blockchain, whenever you try to pitch blockchain to anyone, please try to stay away from the territory of calling it trustless, because it isn't trustless. Now, coming to where blockchain works. So blockchain works best for consortiums. What are consortiums? Consortiums are groups of companies that are either involved in the same field. They interact with each other. They are business partners. So a consortium could be a consortium of banks. So I'm sure many of you all would know SWIFT, the international network on which transactions work. So SWIFT is an example of a banking consortium, an association of several companies of banks which work within the financial sector, deal with each other on a day-to-day basis. Many of them are competitors of each other, but still they are in the same field. So here we have a basic level of trust. Banks know that every bank is governed by a set of laws, and the bank must follow those set of laws, or else there are some legal procedures you can follow, you will be in trouble. So we do have a basic level of trust between the competitors. But again, they are competitors, so they don't trust each other entirely. So in this sort of a situation, using the blockchain is a great way of implementing the technology. I think the best example of this would be Ripple. So Ripple is a competitor to SWIFT, and it really works on bringing banks together to run the Ripple network. And the reason why they agree to run the Ripple network is because although they are, sort of interacting directly with competitors, the customer has a better service. So instead of taking 3-4 days or up to a week sending a Swift transaction with high fees, you can now send a transaction through Ripple under an hour for just a few cents. So the consumer benefits. Banks see this as a great opportunity, and they're ready to implement it. So one example that I've put here is the Digital Asset Holdings consortium. This is the consortium that is sort of supportive of cryptos, especially of ICOs and tokens. Many of them still have their reservations, but more or less, we have companies like JP Morgan, the world's biggest bank. We have BNP Paribas, again, a very big bank. We have IBM, Accenture, both technology companies. So all of these guys, they are supportive of blockchain, and they themselves are capable of running blockchain among themselves. So the easiest way to go about thinking of blockchain and how to implement blockchain is to probably identify consortiums. Try to identify situations where, players within an industry interact with each other. So I think an Indian example I could give you is Citi, which is the Confederation of Indian Textile Industries. So Citi is an consortium of textile players, and certainly having a blockchain run among them for some purpose could be a feasible solution, because remember, these guys know each other. The owners of one factory in the textile industry know the owners of the other factory. They know that there's a set of laws. They know that they face common problems. They know that they have the same customer. They also know that they're competitors. But at the end of the day, if you can come up with a blockchain solution that offers value to them, where they are encouraged to give information, and the result of giving that information would be a better customer experience for them, then it is then that they would really be encouraged to run the blockchain. Speaking of consortiums, the opposite of a consortium would be a company. So one company. What's the example of one company? Well, you may have, maybe, let's say you have one bank, and that one bank is trying to run a blockchain network within itself. I'm not saying that it isn't possible, but usually within a company, blockchain really isn't a very good fit. So why is that? Well, think about it this way. You're trying to guarantee trust. You're trying to guarantee immutability.
Hi, Aman. Hello, Aman.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah.
Yeah, there is one question in the chat box. Can you please see?
It's okay. I will come back to the questions after each section. So I've noticed that. I'll come back to it.
Okay.
So let's look at this. Let's take the example of a simple company. Let's say we had a company that was involved in processing iron, and let's say they had their main ports of interaction would be the port where they bought the iron ore, a factory where they refined the iron ore, and certain sales channels through which they sold the refined iron. Now, would it make sense to put a blockchain in this sort of a company? To be honest, I don't think so, because within a company, there is pretty much 100% trust. You are literally running your own company. Everything, all your systems are being run by the same organization. So there's no real need for having a trustless solution. We already clarified, but it's not trustless, but nevertheless, whatever trust it does offer, it's not worth it. Why is it not worth it? Because as we'll go ahead, and I'm sure you guys already know this, but blockchain has a number of overheads to it. So blockchain, for once, is very process heavy. It requires a much greater amount of processing power than a normal database solution. So when you consider whether it's worth running a blockchain, you need to consider the various factors associated with it. The cost of running the nodes, which includes electricity and internet connection, the processing power that you're going to be giving to it, and the possibility of the blockchain system collapsing if the nodes stop functioning correctly. The maintenance associated with it, you need to pay higher to engineers who can actually implement the blockchain solution. So all of these are added costs that will drive up the cost for the company. And in most cases, the company will decide that no, blockchain really isn't for us. We already have a level of trust. We trust our branches, we trust our port, we trust the factory, we trust the sales channel. So it doesn't really make sense to put a blockchain into it. Where could a blockchain work within a company? Well, if you're a really massive company, so in this case, if you are Maersk, the biggest shipping line in the world, well, maybe blockchain does make sense for you, and they're already trying to use it. Why? Because a shipping line, for example, has hundreds of nodes. They ship to hundreds of countries. They have hundreds of ships, and they have thousands and millions of cartons or packages being delivered each year. So in that case, having a blockchain solution to keep track of each package as it arrives and leaves ports, as it gets loaded onto ships, as it gets sent across, third-party channels, it makes sense to have blockchain. One of the reasons why it does make sense, in addition to the obvious advantages of keeping track of so much data, is many of these companies sort of outsource a lot of their business. So Maersk India may be operated separately than the Maersk Global Foundation. So in that sense, having blockchain to keep a track on these subsidiaries is a great idea, and that's why Maersk could possibly go for a blockchain solution. I've heard that they're actually working with IBM to get this done, and I think this is a great example of how it works within a company. But in typical situations, I wouldn't recommend you look at blockchain for within a company. So next we have immutability, scalability, and performance. Three terms. These are the three terms that you generally associate with a blockchain. Immutability, well, the fact that once a record is logged on the blockchain, it can't be edited, it can't be, it can't be deleted in any way. Scalability, the possibility of expanding blockchain from handling a few hundred transactions to a few thousand transactions to a million transactions. That's what scalability is. Performance is how resource intensive it is, how quickly it can process transactions, and so on. Now, the problem with these three terms is that all of these three are things that you want. You want a blockchain to be immutable, you want a blockchain to be scalable, and you want a blockchain to have high performance. But the problem is that when you sort of put emphasis on one of these, the other one generally goes down. So immutability, what would generally be associated with stronger protection in terms of immutability is having more nodes. So like I said, 300 nodes are more secure than 3 nodes, and 3000 nodes are more secure than 300 nodes. But every time you sort of boost this sense of security, you also reduce the performance, because every time you send a transaction on the blockchain network, instead of going through just 3 nodes, it now has to go through 3000 nodes. There's a propagation time. Each of those machines must spend a considerable amount of time sort of cracking the code, registering it, mining the transaction. So in that sense, as you increase security in terms of immutability, you automatically pull down on performance. Scalability is another problem. The best example would be the Bitcoin network. So Bitcoin typically handles 5 or 10 transactions per second. And Visa, the credit card company, handles 30,000 transactions a second. So it really calls into question, how scalable is blockchain? I would say it is scalable. There are certainly ways to scale blockchain. But I do feel that in many ways, blockchain will always be slower than a traditional sort of database or file sharing system, simply because all the data must be copied through thousands, hundreds of nodes. And that takes time, that takes energy, that takes resources, all of which sort of reduce the performance of the chain. So scalability is an issue currently with blockchain, and people are trying their best to resolve it. I think one example would be, how people are trying to shift to proof of stake instead of proof of work, where instead of having thousands of nodes mindlessly trying to mine the blockchain, we have a limited number of nodes, and all of those nodes have a certain share in the chain, in the system. So we pick one out based on how much money they're ready to stake, and that person mines the chain, and the others simply verify whether that mining operation is successful. This is great because it sort of reduces your dependence on multiple machines mining it. It makes the process a lot less resource intensive, but it's again something that's still in the works, and we are still to see, big chains sort of getting into it. Ethereum is trying to get into proof of stake. but that's still slightly away from reality right now, and we have to wait and see how that works. Performance, again, very closely linked, resource intensive. You increase the number of nodes, performance will go down. You will be spending more money per transaction. Your transaction times will be slower. So yeah, so these are three things you really need to consider. So if a company really needs, or if a consortium really needs immutability, are they willing to trade off scalability and performance? These are the kind of questions you need to ask yourself. And you really need to figure out whether the trade-off is worth it for the company. I think what really boils down, the last section of this, last slide of this section really talks about how you can try and architect the best blockchain solution in the world. But the truth is that most companies right now simply don't have the infrastructure needed to run the blockchain. Most of them aren't even on the cloud as yet. So the first step is to put companies on the cloud. And the next step after that is to get them to adopt blockchain. Most of them are simply not going to be open to the idea of having hundreds of nodes. They'll question the cost, they'll question the performance. But even if they were, they still need to build that infrastructure. Many companies also, quite surprising. Many of you may be surprised, but as you go into the industry, you will find out that a lot of things even today are still manual, are still paperwork. They aren't even digitalized. And that paperwork is really hard to put on the blockchain. You need digitalized versions. Adapting enterprise apps to fit blockchain is another big deal. Remember, once an enterprise gets used to a particular way of work, if it works fine for them, they're going to be very, very reluctant to switch. So you need to offer them some real value to get them to use your solution. Otherwise, they're just going to use what they use right now. So, we need to wait until that infrastructure comes up. And if you have a great idea that requires that sort of infrastructure, one of the things you'll need to do, we'll discuss it later, is to identify which companies, which corporations, which consortiums actually have that infrastructure that can, support the blockchain app. So let me look at the questions that you have put up. So Nishant says, will it be applicable to transfer to money only or any kind of information? So one of the things that you're going to learn down this presentation is that applications of blockchain aren't limited to money transfer. Think about it this way. So when apps came about 10 years ago on smartphones, on phones, the first apps were like the basic ones. You could draw on the app, maybe you could write a message, you could have stored notes. But tell me something, did apps stop there? Was note-taking and drawing the only application of a touchscreen or of an application? No, we know that wasn't the case. Right now, Bitcoin and money transfer is what blockchain seems to be all about. But again, I think that this is sort of the first use case of blockchain. And very soon, I think people are already trying to do it. We will be heading into a different tangent, a tangent where blockchain is beyond money transfer, beyond money itself. So I think that is the question that was out there, and I will, look into others. But let's see. Let's go on to the next section. I know that there's a question in the Q&A. I'll look at that towards the end again. Continue to put down the questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. We'll look at that towards the end of the session. So let's see how you can analyze industries and come up with unique blockchain solutions. So the first step to putting blockchain anywhere is to choose an industry you're familiar with. So if you are an engineer and you've worked at an IT company, you're comfortable with IT companies, you know how they work, well, maybe it's time to look into a solution out there. But I don't want to stick to the IT cliche. Blockchain isn't just for IT. Let's say you were a farmer, okay, or let's say you have an agriculture background. You know how farming works. Look into blockchain for farming. Look into blockchain for agriculture. Or maybe you know somebody who is a manager in a factory, or you yourself have worked as a manager in a factory. You know how the industry works. Jump in. Think about the problems you face. Think about how blockchain, how a decentralized solution can help solve those problems. So make sure you choose an industry you're familiar with. Step 2 is to identify points of information exchange. What is information exchange? Well, transfer of data. So anytime where you either send or receive information, whether it's to file your taxes, whether it's to send reports on, the supply, whether it's to send maybe an order to a supplier to ship something, or a quotation to a customer, any of that, any point at which you're using an email or you're using some other form of communication to send or receive information, pick that out. Make a note of all those points in your industry. You need to understand that blockchain is used mostly in information exchange. It's basically a mechanism to ensure that that information is, always present. You can check it at any time. It's transferred securely, and it is completely transparent. So identify points of information exchange. After you've done that, let's say you have a list of 6 or 7 points at which information is exchanged. Identify the need of the industry. So try to identify whether the information needs confidentiality, whether it needs trust, whether it needs permanence. What does it need? If you find that an industry needs immutability, needs permanence, it is something that's super important, it's valuable information, which if lost or if tampered with could have a negative impact on how that industry runs, those are the points that you need to look at. Look at those points, check them out, keep them on the side. These are the ones you're going to need to tackle. Once you've narrowed down your answer to 2 or 3 points of information exchange, you know what the industry wants. Now start looking at a blockchain solution. Look at the nodes. Who's going to run the nodes? What sort of validation method are you looking at? Are you looking for a proof of work style? Is it going to be a proof of stake style? Think about it. What information do you want to keep on chain and what information do you want to keep off chain? We're going to be looking into this in the case studies that I brought in. Because remember, you don't need to put everything on the blockchain. You can keep some stuff off chain, some stuff that is transferred in the regular old-fashioned manner, and only have a part of the information on the actual blockchain. So these are the kind of questions you need to ask yourself from a technical standpoint, but we all know that just having a great solution or having a great product doesn't mean that that product's going to sell. You still need to ask yourself questions that, am I really creating value for the customer? Is the customer really going to benefit from putting 100 different computers running a blockchain system? Is it something that the customer is really concerned about, or is it a problem that I have made up? Talk to people, ask them what they think about your solution. Then go ahead and architect the solution itself. So, as I promised, industry case studies. The first example we have here is healthcare, the blockchain approach. So I hope all of you are familiar with what a public or a private blockchain is and what permission and non-permission blockchains are. But for those of you who aren't, well, a public chain is one that's accessible to all, and a permission chain is one that a certain number or a certain group of people can actually control or edit or send transactions across. So let's identify the parties involved in this industry. We have the patient, we have a doctor, we may have a path lab, which is your lab where you test blood samples, and you may have a chemist who dispenses drugs. 4 parties, information exchange between them. Patient maybe sends, doctor gives the patient a prescription. Prescription is given to path lab takes scans, sends it to doctor. Scans are evaluated by doctor. Doctor issues another prescription. Prescription is given to chemist. Chemist dispenses drugs. Yeah, that's about it. So a blockchain could be a great fit here. Let's see why. Let's take a situation in which you're sick. You go to a doctor, and the doctor wants to see your medical history. So instead of giving him a big fat file, you give him access to a part of the blockchain, that stores all your health records in an encrypted fashion. The doctor is given temporary access to the decryption key of those records. So maybe for 30 minutes, you can decrypt your records, read them, see what medication you've taken, what illnesses you may have suffered from, and goes to the, he evaluates that, and maybe he suggests some blood tests. Immediately, the blood test request can be sent across the blockchain to a path lab. You go to the path lab, they take your blood sample, generate a report. Now, what they can do is, you don't want your blood report to be with your doctor all the while. If you just email it, your doctor could access it at any time. And in today's world where privacy is a big deal, you don't want that. So, well, the blockchain, the path lab signs a transaction to the doctor that gives the doctor temporary access to your reports, again, for a fixed time duration. You go to the doctor issues a prescription. The prescription is registered to your medical history. So when you go to a chemist and you sort of issue the drugs, when the chemist issues the drugs, on the blockchain, your prescription is marked complete. What that means is now, what often happens is with one prescription, you go to one chemist, they give you the drugs, you go to another chemist, they give you the drugs. And that's one of the main reasons why there are cases of overdose, which often leads to death. If the chemist doesn't stamp the prescription, doesn't sign it, or doesn't make a visible mark on it. But with the blockchain type solution, once your prescription has been issued and once the drugs have been given, well, the prescription is marked complete on the blockchain. You can't tamper with it. You can't just generate a copy of the prescription. So we see that this is great because at every point of interaction, there is a problem of privacy. So privacy in such a solution is given through 5 main ways. Timed, so prescriptions are only visible to the doctor for a specific duration. Verified, when you give your prescription to the chemist can verify that the prescription is right because it has been sent through the doctor's public key. Encrypted, all your information stays encrypted, completely secured. ZKP, which is zero knowledge proofs. We're going to be looking at this in the next slide. And distributed. So in this case, maybe medical centers, government hospitals, private hospitals, all of them could be running nodes. And each of these nodes keep track of blockchain transactions. And because there's no one server that keeps track of all the prescriptions or all the reports, well, your information is well distributed. Coming back to ZKP, I think ZKP plays a very important role in this whole system. Let me give you a brief introduction to it. So I want you to imagine there are 2 people, Tom and Bob, and both Tom and Bob earn a certain amount of money. All right, so they have a certain salary. The problem is that these guys live in a socialist country, where everyone is supposed to earn an equal amount of money. They want to check whether they actually earn the equal amount of money because Tom thinks that Bob earns more than him and Bob thinks that Tom earns more than him. But, they can't directly tell their salaries to each other because if it turns out to be different, well, then there would be social stigma associated with it. So they want a privacy-centered solution for this to verify whether the 2 of them earn the same amount of money. So what do? Well, Tom goes to the market and buys 4 safe boxes. Each of those safe boxes have 4 locks on them, and each of those locks have a corresponding key. Now, each of these safe boxes has a slit on top where you can slip in a piece of paper. Now, what happens is that, the next step, that's the first step of the diagram. The next step is Tom asks, Tom sees that I earn $20. So he takes the key for the $20 safe, he keeps that with him and throws away the keys for the $10, $30, $40 safe. So each of these boxes, in a sense, correspond to Tom's salary. So Tom earns $20, so he keeps the $20 key with him and throws away the remaining keys. Now Tom leaves the room, Bob comes in, takes 4 pieces of paper, on 3 of them he writes no, and on 1 of them he writes yes. He drops the no slits in 10, 20, and 40 because he doesn't earn those amounts, and he drops the yes slit into the $30 box. Great. So we know that Tom has the key to the $20 box, and Bob has put the yes slip in the $30 box. Now Tom comes back in, he opens up the $20 case because that's the only case to which he has the key, and he finds the word no written on it. So he knows that Tom and Bob don't earn the same amount of money. What's spectacular about this whole transaction is that neither Bob nor Tom know what the other one earns. They just know that they don't earn the same amount of money. And they've done this in a completely privacy-centered manner. Similarly, you could, in theory, apply ZKPs to blockchain, to healthcare. ZKPs can run on top of the blockchain, and in many ways, checking whether a patient has taken a particular drug, instead of viewing their whole history, you could have a ZKP type solution for that. And ZKP has a number of applications in many different fields. It's still very new. You really need a lot of research into this field to get a hang of it. This is a very simplified explanation of how it works. But it's a technology that is coming up. It's something to be really excited about. And it's something I would encourage all of you to really, really look into. Next, we have police. Now, this is where things get interesting. You know how I talked about on-chain and off-chain? Well, this is a great example of how it works. So police people have evidence. So they may have fingerprints. They may have documents recovered from the crime scene. They may have samples of blood that have been tested. All of these pieces of evidence. But even today, a lot of this evidence is kept in hard copy, kept in safes that can be easily stolen, documents that can be easily tampered, misplaced, and well, that really changes the outcome of the case. So how do we keep a secured solution for police evidence using the blockchain? So what we do is we keep evidence, so regular evidence, so maybe a digital representation of the fingerprints, a digital copy of the analytical reports of the DNA test on a normal server, a centralized server. What we do keep on the blockchain is a hash of that file. So a hash is nothing but a unique combination of numbers and digits as assigned to each file. So two different files, if they have two different contents, even if they have 1 byte different, they'll have entirely different hashes. But the real advantage of these hashes are that they're very small. A typical hash is only 128 bytes to 256 bytes long. A file, on the other hand, may be megabytes, gigabytes, or a terabyte big. But the hash is always a fixed length. This means you can keep a relatively limited amount of information on the blockchain, but at the same time, if the file has been tampered with on the server and you generate a hash for that file, it won't match with the hash that's on the police server or police blockchain. So in court, if you try to present tampered evidence, the judge will know that it's tampered with, and it's not acceptable to court. In this manner, each police station or each substation could have a sort of a blockchain node running, and the information that's stored on this node is relatively limited because it's very small, but at the same time, it's crucial to identifying what sort of information is flawed, what sort of information is tampered with. So you really need to think about solutions like these. Solutions where you're keeping the amount of data stored on the blockchain to a limited. So remember that a blockchain isn't meant to be a data storage solution. It's not an alternative to traditional databases. It's meant to supplement them. So if you can find a way to keep big, heavy files on traditional data storage systems and keep the really small, tiny details that make the difference on the blockchain, well, that's the way to go forward. And a system like this should be acceptable because we've managed to keep that immutable element, the element where the file can't be tampered because we know if it was tampered, and the performance at peak. So try to come up with solutions that use this sort of ingenuity, and you'd really go a long way. The next example I have is subsidies. So we all know what subsidies are. Subsidies are given by governments, and they are more often than not consumed before they reach the final beneficiary. So how we've always seen, I think in Hindi movies and everywhere else, how the middleman always gets the biggest chunk of the subsidy. The government gives 1,000 crores for farmers, only 200 crores reaches them. 800 crores is eaten on the way by the distributor. Again, let's go by the traditional approach. What are the parties involved? The government, the distributor, and the beneficiary. Information is being exchanged across them. Can we keep track of each kilogram of rice, of each kilogram of wheat given as subsidy on the blockchain? Yes, we can. And every time that money or that grain or that utility is passed on from the government to the distributor, a log is made on the blockchain. When it's passed from the distributor to the beneficiary, another log is made on the blockchain. And all of this could be facilitated by having Aadhaar linked subsidies. So when we're looking at Aadhaar, which is again something I'm going to be covering down a few slides down, Aadhaar is great because we do have a unique identity method now in India, something that's well supported over the internet. Can we somehow tweak Aadhaar to form the public key of certain blockchain accounts? Now, I'm not saying that the Aadhaar number is literally the public key of a blockchain holding account, but maybe can we apply some sort of an algorithm to it, combining the unique identification code of each person with certain personal details and generate a hash that represents their account on the blockchain. And every time you need to make a transaction to that account, so when every time you want to send grain to that account over the blockchain, maybe you need to scan the Aadhaar card, or maybe you need to have some sort of a system that works that way. And for transparency's sake, the government can actually keep such a system completely viewable to the public. The public can see what subsidy is going where, how much is with the distributor, how much of it is left over. And now you can't have those sneaky tricks where you edit out computer records or you burn pages or you do any of that hanky-panky. That isn't there anymore through blockchain. Insurance, another place closely linked to finance where blockchain has great application. So let's see, what does an insurance company really have to deal with? It has to deal with an incident. It has to deal with the claim report, the settlement, and the credit or decredit of funds. So everything from the incident taking place to the police filing its reports to a settlement taking place, all of this can be kept on the blockchain. For what purpose? Well, the government needs to regulate how insurance companies manage claims. So the government setting up a blockchain system which requires each insurance player to sort of keep a record of settlements, to keep a record of evidence, to keep a record of any new data that's coming in related to an insurance case. It could add a lot of transparency to it. We know that a lot of disputes erupt every day regarding claims, insurance claims, where people are either denied the claim or are not given sufficient money for it. And at the end of the day, putting that up in court requires evidence. And the best way to keep track of that evidence, as we already observed with the police example, is on the blockchain. So you could have everything here again on the blockchain. It makes me consider again whether we want to put everything, all the data on it, or whether we want to keep something as simple as hashes on the actual system. So think about it. There are ways to go about, but I think definitely insurance is another industry where blockchain can make it big. Now here is a slightly extended case study on IDs, digital IDs. So privacy. We all know that privacy is a big deal. We know that India has recently declared privacy a fundamental right. We know it's something that's protected. So what do we do about it? Well, we do have measures to keep it in place, but I think the biggest place where privacy really has a hard time catching up is in IDs. So an ID like Aadhaar, which has all my information, my date of birth, my address, my blood group, my health record, everything is linked to Aadhaar these days. I can check my bank statements through Aadhaar. I can open a new bank account through Aadhaar. We need to ensure that people have their data stored privately. Now, it's important for you to think like a hacker. As a hacker, would you attack a system that has a small reward, or would you attack a system that has a large reward? Well, certainly the large reward. In this case, for ITs, You have most of the data in a centralized server, data being stored on one or a few servers. You have sensitive data equals expensive data. So if you sell it in the black market, you can earn a lot of money. And you have a large volume of data. If you can get 1 million records, and each of those records can be sold at $2, well, you earn $2 million, just by hacking into one server. This is why hackers are inclined to test the security of IDs like Aadhaar. And we frankly aren't doing a great job keeping it safe. So let's see how Aadhaar works typically. So you have the citizen, you and me, who have Aadhaar cards. You have an authentication user agency. This would be something like Vodafone. So when you give them your Aadhaar card to verify your details, well, they are an AUA. You have an ASA, which basically takes data from Vodafone, pipes it to the UIDAI server, and of course you have the UIDAI. Now at each of these points, there is a chance of information being misused. So if as a customer, I give them my Aadhaar ID, how can I be sure that they aren't going to misuse it? How can I be sure that they won't keep a local copy of my records with them? How can I be sure that my data is private? How can I be sure that even if Vodafone is doing it the right way, the ASA isn't, committing some sort of data privacy fraud? It's very hard to know. And it's even harder to prove in court. I think the most, probably concerning aspect of this whole issue is something I picked out from the Aadhaar website. Biometric and OTP data captured for the purposes of Aadhaar authentication should not be stored on any permanent storage or database. Should not be stored. So you mean to say that our privacy hinges on the goodwill of a company, that they'll abide by the laws, they'll keep everything, neat and clean, they won't store anything. But we all know that companies don't work that way. If they have an opportunity to make money, they will make money. And if they feel that they can store data and get away with it, well, they will do it. So what do we do about it? One example is we could have smart contracts at work. So Aadhaar information itself needn't be on servers. They could be on centralized servers. It needn't be on the blockchain. But every transaction, every time that record is accessed, well, that needs to be on the blockchain. We need to have smart contracts that can give information for a limited time duration. Read-only access to what you need when you need it, after which, sorry, you can't access it anymore. Accountability, where requests are recorded, so as a consumer, you can see if Vodafone's been trying to look up your Aadhaar history when you've not asked it to do so. Privacy, zero knowledge proofs. Can Vodafone verify my identity without getting any data from me? Can it verify that I'm Aman Ladia without actually fetching those records from the server? Can the blockchain operate using ZKPs where I supply my information, the smart contract applies the ZKP fundamental and just compares whether the data is correct. It doesn't know what the data is. It just knows that the information I'm giving is correct. A way you can weave in blockchain into your solution. I'm trying to emphasize ZKPs because I think that they are a great technology, and I think that they are the ones that are going to make the difference. ZKPs, homomorphic encryption. If these are terms you're not familiar with, you really should get familiar with them now. Some chains like Zcash, I don't know if you know about it, it's another coin. It uses ZKPs, where information about a transaction isn't available to the public. ZKPs are used to verify whether a transaction is valid or not. Great application for, for blockchain. A distributed ledger. Aadhaar card, Aadhaar information, not stored in one server. Each state could be a ledger or could be a node in the system. Each state has IITs, has IIMs, has institutes. In the US, for example, you have educational institutes like MIT and Stanford that keep track of all the information. In India, we don't have that. But we do have IITs, we do have IIMs, we do have all these great institutes that are, supposed to be fundamentals. They're supposed to lead the market. And yet we don't have a sufficiently advanced blockchain solution. It's disturbing. We really do need to have one. So I think having these sort of nodes, educational institutes run nodes, having government offices run nodes, that's certainly a possibility. And I think the amount our government spends on running private servers, I mean, I don't think that this cost is honestly going to be much higher than that. Maybe small or slightly, but I think the kind of benefits it gives, it's definitely worth it. So let me just look at the questions that have been posed. So I'm going to open up the chat and see. So Sheetal Bole has asked, any case study of blockchain in the IT industry? I think the IT industry is such a broad industry. It's such a receptive industry. There have been, cases of blockchain being used in IT. Whether I can think of one on the top of my head, I think all of the IT companies, stuff like Accenture, IBM, all of them have been experimenting with blockchain, but most of them are actually developing blockchain for other industries. Because, the IT industry in itself is a very software-driven industry. It's an industry where there's no real physical product being manufactured. A lot of it is information. And definitely the IT industry is much higher than others when it comes to safety, when it comes to privacy. So I'll need to check up on any IT specific case studies, but I do know that there is potential for it there. But also you're definitely better off looking at more traditional industries when it comes to trying and applying blockchain. Because remember, hundreds and thousands of people are trying to put blockchain in IT. I mean, Bitcoin is essentially IT, but very few are looking to put it in agriculture, in manufacturing, in supply chain. You could be the one who does that. And if you're the first one to do it, you're the one who's going to make a bang for the buck. So let's go on to the last section. This is really the time where I would want, you to start putting questions up in the main Q&A section. Put as many as you do, because I don't think this is going to take more than 10 minutes. We can spend the remaining 15-20 minutes trying to answer questions. So let's get into it. 60-day timeline to get from being a rookie to an expert. Really, 60 days. That's what you need to step up from being a beginner in blockchain to one who has his or her own blockchain solution. So for the sake of simplicity, I have divided these 60 days into 4 quarters. Each quarter is 15 days long, and each quarter has certain steps that you need to follow. So the quarter 1 will involve analysis of the industry and needs. We already discussed this in the first slide, first section. Choose an industry you're familiar with. Just because everyone is doing Bitcoin, everyone is doing Ethereum, don't do it. If you're comfortable with agriculture, do that. You're comfortable with manufacturing, go ahead. That's the most important part of a blockchain application. The more intimately you're connected with an industry, that's the only way you can really come up with a good solution. Come up with a workable plan. As I said, I'm going to scroll back up so we can see what I'm talking about. Evaluate needs, identify points of exchange, architect a blockchain solution. Make a plan for it. Don't actually go ahead and architect it right now, but make a plan. What is the industry you're looking at? What are you trying to figure out? What are these problems that you're trying to solve? How is the customer going to benefit? Write out a brief summary of your idea. Remember, when VCs, when investors, when customers look at your idea, they don't want a PhD thesis on it. We've been trained that writing more is writing better. Remember, these guys have 30 seconds to be impressed. If you can impress them within 30 seconds, you've got the deal. If you can't, well, you lost it. 200 words is the top limit for writing the summary of your idea. Most importantly, this is slightly going into marketing territory, but you need to highlight what is it? Why is the customer willing to spend $100,000 on your blockchain solution? Is that solution going to save him $100,000? Is that solution going to save him $10 million? Or is that solution not going to save him anything? It needn't be money. It could be time. It could be resources. But if you do have any saving, you can always link that back to money. So please talk about why will your customer want to use your solution. You have a summary ready, develop a 2-page vision document. It's an executive summary. It gives some technical highlights of what you're looking at, but it also covers pros and cons, potential limitations. What are you gonna, how is your business gonna scale? Are you looking at a very niche category of customers? Are you looking at a very broad audience? Each of these has their own advantages and disadvantages. I'm not going to go into detail into what an executive summary should look like. You can look that up on the internet. Keep that as a term you need to study. But that's basically what the 4 steps are. 15 days, 4 steps. I would say spend 1 week on the first one. So 7 to 10 days on choosing an industry and coming up with a workable plan. You can write the summary and the vision document in less than a day if you really know what you're doing. Quarter 2, networking. What does networking involve? Networking involves building connections with potential clients. You need to find people who can take your idea forward. If you're a team, that's great. If you're 3 or 4 people, amazing. But now it's time to get in touch with the big people who can, really push your idea forward. Investors, customers, government, whoever you're trying to target. You need to attend conferences. You need to make a LinkedIn page. You need to start contacting people. Call up 5 people a day. Call up maybe 10 people a day. So in 15 days, maybe call up 100, 150 people. It's hard. It's going to be very hard. And I can guarantee you that out of 150 people, maybe 148 will reject you. 2 people, maybe just 1 person will say yes. And that 1 person is the one who's going to take your project ahead. Now, it is slightly difficult to get this done in 15 days. But if you are really dedicated, you can get it done. Think about it. Spend some time on it. Make connections. It's very good if you already have connections in your field, which is why I said have some exposure in some industries. So this is what your second quarter needs to look at. I'm going to give a special shout out here to certain states like Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. These guys are very receptive to startups. So if I know some schemes of Telangana, I think they pay half of your employees' fees for the first 6 months. They give you a free power. I think they give you very cheap office spaces. They cut down on taxation until your company starts generating a minimum amount of revenue. They have great schemes, guys. Seriously, look at them. These states are really the states to go for. Don't be stuck in Bombay. Don't be stuck in Delhi. These cities are going to suck money out of your startup. Think about states like these. These are the ones who will really, really push your company forward. So a part of this quarter is to understand the concerns of your customers. What are your concerns? What do your customers think could be the problem? Maybe 150 people you call up, 130 of them are like, you know what, Aman, it's great, but I don't think I have the infrastructure to put it up. Or, I think I need to spend too much money trying to even set this up. Aman, I think you guys are very young right now. You guys are very fresh. I don't know whether I can trust you guys with this. Or, Aman, you know what? I'd rather go to TCS to get this done. Why would I go to you? These are all questions that they could ask. And many times customers can be very, very open about their concerns. So, take this as constructive feedback. Look at LinkedIn. Take their feedback, improve your product, refine your document, and continue to pitch. That's the only way you can get successful. Call them up, schedule meetings. They may be running around. Tell them that you're here for 5 minutes. I'm ready to travel 2 hours to meet you. If it's a big, important person, you need to be willing to do that. Remember, when you're running a business, shed your ego aside. These guys, these guys are a lot bigger than you, and they have a lot many resources. They are very experienced in this field. You need to get to know them well. And, there's no way to get to know them well rather than to take their own suggestions and, continue to build your product stronger. Refinement of idea. So Q3 needs to be using all this feedback, resolving all the problems one by one. List out the 5 reasons why a client may reject you. I'm telling you, it's not going to be hard. You yourself probably already know those reasons, but still talk to people, get the reasons out. Do a statistical analysis. 50% of people who I called up said that I won't buy your product because it's too expensive or because I don't know what value it's going to add. Start tackling them one by one. In fact, at this point, I'd even recommend you guys read the book. It's called The Lean Startup. It's a great book. And one of the things that it really talks about is choosing when to persevere and choosing when to pivot. If everyone you're calling says that, Aman, I really don't think my business is going to be benefited by your product, well, maybe it's time to start thinking, is the product really useful, or is it just something you made up? Think about that. Come up with a 10-slide pitch deck. Pitch decks are basically an encapsulation of your business plan, what product you're selling, how you plan to scale. Push these off to investors, push these off to contacts. Use every bit of resource you have to push your idea forward. The last quarter deals with final commitment. You need to have a final copy of your pitch deck, a vision statement, contact connections, arrange official meetings, and pitch your idea. I think this is the favorite part of the process for me. Knowing that I have a great product, knowing that I'm going to get people to invest in my company. That's really a source of pride for me. And it should be for you too. And by this stage, you should have refined your idea enough to answer any questions that VCs investors have about your product. So that's pretty much it. A 60-day timeline from start to finish to really, really push off on your business. So I have my email ID here, and I'll be sending these slides across. So certainly feel free to write to me for any clarification. In fact, if you have any idea, send it across here. And as and when I get time, I will certainly reply back. I'm a bit busy these days, but I'm sure that I'll be able to find time out to help you guys. So coming to that, I think let's start answering questions. I'm again going to open up my chat window. Okay, let's go. Let's see. Arvind, is there any blockchain in music industries or royalties and others? Okay. Take an example. Just give me a minute. I'll be able to find this out. So I recently heard of a singer who was selling music over the blockchain. And the way it worked was they skipped the distributors, they skipped the record labels. And instead, the smart contract ran in such a way that everyone, so the songwriter got a 1% royalty every time a song sold. And everything was automated over the blockchain. I think they sold this on Ethereum. You can certainly look it up. It's a great, great way in which music is in fact trying to incorporate blockchain. So certainly a lot of potential there. Okay, so let's see what Narayan has to say. Hi, I have a query in supply chain industry. Assume I would like to float RFQs with multiple suppliers through blockchain. How does it work? Meaning, do I have to have multiple systems, multiple people to confirm the transaction? Great. So request for quotations, great application within supply chain. So ideally, you would need to build a system in which all your clients, in which all the parties are on one blockchain. So you would need to have literally a blockchain running specifically for RFQs. Nothing exists right now, at least to the extent that I'm aware. So if you really want to do so, you're going to have to build a system yourself right now. Which is why I say right now, blockchain is in very early stages of development. It still has a long way to go. And right now, frankly, there is no operational RFQ system that I have heard of that runs on the blockchain. But I'm sure that all of you, if any of you are interested in supply chain, you could look into such a situation, such a system, and maybe look at how it works, look at how the pros and cons would be. Okay, let's look at the next one. How can we decouple blockchain from Bitcoin or for general purpose? This is true. This is one question that I'm asked all the time whenever I'm trying to pitch Liquid or whenever I'm trying to pitch any of my products. Aman, blockchain is used by mafias in Russia to sell drugs, Bitcoin. I don't think it's safe. I think it's illegal. I think, blockchain is quite a hard concept. In fact, it took me quite a while to really understand what blockchain is. And decoupling blockchain from Bitcoin, from the general public, is hard. It's very hard. Now, what can you do about it? Well, I think knowledge starts from home. So if you meet someone who is of that view, what I usually do is, I try to give an example of blockchain being used in the real world. And the best one that I usually use is Ripple. So I tell them, most of these guys are in banking, they are in BFSI, they've heard all the stories, they know what Swift is. And I tell them about Ripple. Many of them have heard it, many of them haven't heard it. But those who have, well, they get the idea almost instantly. Those who haven't, explain a little bit, and they'll really start to see what it's about. Now, I assume most of you are Indians and most of you have had most of your careers in India. That is one problem within India. Most people don't really know what blockchain is. So start building international connections. Start building connections with people abroad. These guys are a lot more open to ideas, and you will have a better response out there. But nevertheless, I think if you personally want to contribute, the best way to do so is to write. So I'll be sharing across some links to the articles I've written. I would encourage you to write some similar articles. Publish them online, post them on social media, get your network to know that blockchain is not Bitcoin. To start a career as a blockchain generalist, what kind of technical IT expertise is required if I don't have a programming background? So I think fundamentally speaking, you need to pick a platform. The best platform right now, I think, is Hyperledger. It's what most industries use. It's probably the best recognized one. You could do a course on it. I don't think there's any way where you're going to get like a full-fledged Hyperledger degree. That's simply not there right now. Do a course on it. Get a certificate for that. That's, I think, more or less the technical knowledge you need. I think as a programmer in general, to be honest, a lot of the stuff that I learn isn't what I've learned from textbooks. In fact, when you come into the real programming world, you'll realize that, the applications for some product, 1 + 1 = 2, print this, print that, are fairly limited. Every time you make a product, you're going to need new tools, and you get those tools every time by researching on the internet, looking at books, referencing. So start by doing a course. I'm not saying that that's bad. That will help you get a good foundation on it. Also start thinking about, doing a course on blockchain in general. I think a lot of interest right now in blockchain is in business. And to really sell blockchain, you need to be good at business. So probably having an executive course on blockchain with respect to business and industries. The examples that I gave are right now what I could summarize in 1 hour. But a business related course would explain the same thing over the course of a few months. It would give you much deeper insights into it. So having those to a business side as well as a technical side is probably what you need to really get ahead. Yes, you do get the presentation slides. How DTube influences by blockchain? I'm not sure what DTube is. Let me just have a look. It says it's a blockchain-based social media platform. I'm honestly not too familiar with DTube. I've never used it. I haven't built it up. But from what I can see is, it's no ads, no censorships, no view counts. I think, I'm not really sure what DTube is. I need to look into it. But in general, I'm slightly opposed to using blockchain in social media simply because that really isn't what blockchain is made for. It's made for, usually right now, I think blockchain's role is largely enterprise related. As soon as you link it directly to a client, to a content producer, it gets slightly tricky. So I don't really know what DTube is about, but I can tell you that social media and blockchain aren't really the thing right now. And I would slightly steer you away from that territory. It's not the best example of how blockchain can be used. What is the example of application of blockchain to renewable energy? Okay, renewable energy is a big thing. I think that the application of blockchain to renewable energy is going to be largely in terms of, what is renewable energy at the end of the day? It's basically an industry that requires manufacturers, clients who purchase, equipment, which could be governments, private farms, etc., keeping track of energy requirements. Best use case of blockchain right now that I can think of from the top of my head would probably be, trying to figure out how do we keep track of either the supply chain part of renewable energy, which would involve supply of technology, of equipment, or trying to keep track of how you're adhering to government regulations. So if you were to build a blockchain type solution for the government, because even renewable energy plants do have certain things to look after. Wind energy, for example, they do have a lot of environmental restrictions on them. They can only be built in certain areas. They must produce a certain amount of energy. They must have certain safety procedures, maintenance, etc. Having those on the blockchain for the health of the government, that's certainly something that could work. What programming or tool we can use for developing blockchain? Like I said, Hyperledger, Solidity for Ethereum, all things that you could look at. I work for a bank. We transfer data across many banks for a mutual fund transaction and use service to transfer it. Can we do this using blockchain? Certainly, I think this is a great example. Look at it right now. I'm not sure for fund transactions what specific one are you using, but try to see if you guys could within your bank, if you guys have a research department. So if you work in an MNC bank like Emirates NBD, the one that I was associated with, these guys have great research departments. If you have one of those, maybe it's time to start experimenting with a potential application, a consortium. Try to get in contact with friendly banks. Maybe start by operating, a small scale blockchain operation within your bank itself, within branches, and then think about how you can scale it up to other banks. I think that question's already answered for programming or tool. How much time it will take to build? Well, that will vary really drastically depending on the complexity of the app. One thing you really need to be sure when you're developing blockchain is that, remember, blockchain deals with money a lot of the times, and money needs to be dealt with securely. And blockchain is an app, the platform such that if you publish the wrong code once, there's no way to delete it. So you really need to check whether your code's correct. And for this, I really recommend that you guys do take help of professional programmers who are really trained in this, who have a lot of experience within the blockchain, because it does take time. It does take effort. It's not easy. But I think if you guys start working on it right now, sooner or later, you will build up to a point where you're as good as the pros. What's the difference between blockchain developer and blockchain application developer? I think they're nearly the same things. I don't know if this is specific to a particular company that tries to differentiate the two applications. But I think blockchain developer is more or less related to the hardcore technical side, building an app, programming it, while an application developer's role will be more towards also thinking about the potential use case, the actual application itself. So not just a manual worker typing up code and trying to churn out results, but also someone who thinks of the actual product being designed. New people can find okay, yeah, that's Amity Online. DLT and blockchain, differences between them. Okay, so DLT is digital ledger technology or distributed ledger technology. Blockchain is a type of DLT. Right now, blockchain is the main type of DLT. We do have some other networks like Stellar, etc., which are slightly different than blockchain, but they all have information spread out in a distributed fashion. So DLT is a broader umbrella term, like a cell phone. And so if you had DLT could be called a cell phone, and blockchain could be called an Android phone. So it's a type of DLT. There are some other types. It's the predominant form of DLT, the one that's most popular. But I think even stuff like Hashgraph can be classified under DLT. Okay. So cons of blockchain. Would you think blockchain would mature in the next 5 years in countries like India as predicted by the Gartner curve? You know, I think the part of that question that I am most skeptical about is in countries like India. Now, India has been doing great. We've been trying to put into blockchain into land records. I think Andhra recently put their land record system onto the blockchain. But I think really technologies tend to come to India a couple of years after they've been tried and tested in the West. And even today, I think the West is 2 or 3 years away from having a fully mature blockchain development. The ICO cycle has certainly died down. We now have lesser, ICOs coming in. We have more real hardcore companies. But I think India is still a bit far away from that. I think if you really want opportunities, try to look at either European countries, look at the Americas for sure. But if you want something closer to home, look at Singapore, look at Dubai, look at the Middle East. These guys are really, really heavy. Dubai wants to be the next America. And they know that blockchain is the next big thing. So they are pulling in money, they are pulling in resources. Definitely try to look at countries like Dubai. India is still slightly far away. Okay, so cases of hardware wallets. This is again a gimmick. One problem with blockchain is that it's used a lot as a gimmick. If you have, many people just put in blockchain for the sake of putting it in. I think there was a case in which a company that sells oil or soaps in the United States, they put in the word blockchain and their stocks became 3 times as big in a space of a month or so. They didn't have anything to do with the blockchain. They just put that word in. Hardware wallets, I think at the end of the day, right now for small amounts of money, having a software wallet is more than enough. In fact, I personally use Exodus. That's the wallet that I use to store my funds. So I do also have a Ledger Nano. So that's the hardware wallet I use. Like towards the end of, as blockchain really matures, as crypto gets more and more popular, manufacturers will start putting in hardware wallet chips within their devices embedded within it. So HTCs try to be ahead of the curve, but I think right now the users of Bitcoin and blockchain on mobile platforms are so limited that I think it's more of a gimmick right now.
Yeah.
If there's any.
Yeah, Aman, so we have more questions on the Q&A session. Can you please look into it?
Yeah, I'll just quickly run over these. PhD program, no, not really. Run on Hyperledger on Cords. Will future applications also run on them? Yes, Hyperledger is definitely something that is going to stay. Definitely 100%. It will be there. Hyperledger is actually open source, Hyperledger Fabric. It's not really run by a particular company. It's more like a community. So definitely it's here to stay. Blockchain as a database to store information as a medium of information exchange. Yeah. Remember that blockchain isn't some magical technology. It isn't a mobile phone that can run, it isn't as versatile as that. But please remember that with stuff like Ethereum and Hyperledger, where you can run smart contracts on blockchain, it's sort of become more than a database. It can intelligently work through data. So yeah, in fundamental, it is a database, but I think it is definitely more than that, thanks to features like smart contracts. So I'm going to be opening up the Q&A section there. Let's see. What happens if the doctor asks for more tests or the chemist refers another chemist for specific drugs? Wait, reference to the healthcare example. Well, you would potentially have smart contracts that do allow for that facility. So allowing you to send a prescription transaction from one chemist to another, that's something that could work. More tests, the doctor simply issues a new request on the chain that's registered at a different time. So, I'm speaking in a very high level sense here. As you get into the nitty-gritties, you can program additional use cases. Sure, that's definitely how it would be. Any case study for the insurance industry? So I think I gave a more general overview of industry. I'm not going to give a specific example of a company because I feel like that really polarizes the discussion quite a bit. But yeah, I think if you heard my insurance case study, I'll go back to it. It basically involves keeping evidence, keeping claims, keeping reports on the blockchain so that anytime it needs to be accessed, it can be accessed in an immutable manner. The bank question has been answered. Suppose take Aadhaar once data is stored and there is. Right. So specifically in terms of Aadhaar data correction, that's something that the blockchain has been criticized for. Immutability is a double-edged sword. If you make a mistake, how do you correct the mistake? So typically what you would do is you would override the previous one. So the previous information would still stay on record. So the wrong information would still be on record, but you'd issue a new set of instructions, a new set of information that sort of supersedes that. So the old information is never accessed. It stays there, it's never accessed. But I have seen recently, there was an example of a blockchain that can actually destroy itself, where the Merkle root is still kept intact despite certain blocks being removed from the blockchain. We could link that to this system, but as of now, it would largely involve issuing a fresh set of instructions that override the previous information. So yes, that is pretty much it, I think.
So I think, Aman, there are last two questions in the Q&A.
Sure.
If you, so question from Bala, if you scroll up.
Yeah, I think in the answer section, right?
Yeah, in the answer section, also in the open, you have one question left.
Okay, let me check. Okay, yeah, sorry. Current industry is very sensitive to the cost of implementing systems and at the same time critical about the performance as everyone needs information in a click. What is the trade-off between cost and performance in the current state of blockchain adoption? Very good question. So I think, Bala, I think it's really important to realize that many of the problems associated with blockchain are problems that occur in public blockchains. So when you have nodes in different corners of the world being run by different operators at different levels of speed and reliability, that problem is really true. But I think in most industrial applications, you'll have a permission blockchain, and that blockchain is accepted by a limited number of players. And as long as these players, have a minimal amount of trust in each other, and you have maybe 50 or 100 nodes, at that point, speed really doesn't really make much of a difference. Visa needs to handle 30,000 transactions a second, but most businesses will do just fine with 5 transactions a second. That's the blockchain speed, Bitcoin speed. You could have faster systems by using POS. You could have faster systems by shorter block times. And with a permission blockchain, that is certainly a possibility, because if you can, have a permission blockchain where a limited set of players agree on the rules and everything goes for reliability, for speed, you can avoid those problems. So even in time critical industries, cost critical industries, if you can offer a sufficient value proposition where speed really doesn't come into picture, you're not having great amount of transactions per minute, per second, just a few of them. If you can offer if you can reduce the cost somehow, if you can offer a limited amount of nodes, or even if you can run nodes that are not necessarily expensive. I think once I tried out running a node on a Raspberry Pi, and that computer cost $30, and I managed to do a pretty good job with it. I'm not saying you need to use a Raspberry Pi. That's definitely out of the question. But having a low-powered computer also run a blockchain node is a possibility. Many companies already have computers capable of running blockchain nodes, and they already have unutilized processing power. So if you can tap into that, you can give them a great value without compromising on performance. In an intra-company scenario, though there is a trust in the system, but there are also different players within a geographical location or different geographical locations. Still, trust could be a challenge as human involvement in the process is there. Indeed, trust is a big emphasis of this whole PPT. And you're right, in an intra-company situation, if there are different roles in different areas. Trust is a big deal. And I think, humans at the end of the day are what decide it all. If a human puts incorrect information on the blockchain, well, that information will be incorrect. You can't do anything to do it. You can't, force people to put right information. Unfortunately, you can't do that. So, which is why I think blockchain right now, having computer systems operate blockchain is a lot better than having people operate blockchain. So having computer systems that automatically log Aadhaar records on the blockchain is much more efficient than having a person log Aadhaar records on the blockchain. Because the person can decide whether to put stuff on the blockchain or not. But the computer, well, it's designed, the smart contract works in a certain way. It's all out there. So reducing personal interaction and keeping blockchain as a database technology primarily for computers to interact with each other would possibly be the best there is right now. Now, before I close, you will certainly get a copy of the presentation, but as I mentioned in the last slide, my email is right here. It's aman@amanladia.com. But I would certainly encourage you to connect to me on LinkedIn. I keep posting a lot of interesting stuff that you would, as blockchain enthusiasts, find great. I'm more than happy to, accept any questions on LinkedIn. If you have any ideas, send them to me on mail. I promise you, whenever I have the time, I'll look at them, give you some suggestions. I may have some contacts I can connect you to. So keep that in mind. And, you guys are young. You guys are, dynamic. I'm really excited to see what you guys can come up with in blockchain.
Yeah, thanks, Aman. So I think everyone have really got a different level of blockchain scenario from business perspective and how its applications in different industry use cases. So today Aman has explained in a very brief manner, in a very deeply manner, and has also taken a lot of questions from all the participants from various different types of industries. So I hope everyone has enjoyed this webinar. And thanks, Aman. You have definitely addressed to all our participants in a very deeply manner, and I hope they really enjoyed this blockchain webinar. And also, we Careers of Tomorrow Amity Online has come with this initiative of various programs of blockchain technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence. The reason is being that today the India is currently a leading market in this technological transformation space, and that's why one of the technology, that is blockchain technology, which we feel will be a innovative and a different perspective for all the young working professionals who will come to know about this technology. That's why we have come with this PGP, blockchain technology management program. All the new people, apart from the current students, I'd like to request to visit our webpage, visit our website, and anyone has any queries already. We have top leading faculties and industry experts like Aman Ladia. Okay, so thanks all the participants. Hope you enjoyed this webinar. And as we have a shorter time, Aman has also a lot of questions. So thanks, Aman, for having as a one of the as an industry expert for blockchain. And thanks all the participants to attend this webinar. Thank you.